Clara Harper's hand was on the train door when she heard him call out a name that wasn't hers. "Evelyn?" His voice cracked open the morning air like a rifle shot. She turned, and the look on his face, the look on his face nearly buckled her knees. He was holding wildflowers. He had pressed his hat to his chest. His eyes were shining with something so raw, so unguarded, it almost made her turn back around and ride that train all the way to the ocean. Almost. She stepped down onto the platform, looked him square in the eye, and said it. "I'm not who you ordered. If this story already has your heart, please subscribe to the channel and follow along to the very end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's begin." The wildflowers were Luke Callahan's idea. He'd picked them himself that morning before the sun had fully cleared the ridge, walking the east pasture with his boots still dark from dew. He didn't know what kind they were. Yellow ones mostly, with a few pale purple ones tucked in near the stems. His neighbor Hattie Greer had told him once that women liked flowers more than they liked words, and Luke had spent enough time failing at words that he figured Hattie was probably right. He'd been awake since 3 in the morning. Not from nerves, he'd told himself. Just from habit. Ranching didn't leave a man much room for sleeping in, and after 6 years of running, the Callahans spread alone, his body had stopped asking permission before pulling him out of bed in the dark. But he knew if he was being honest, and Luke Callahan had always been too honest for his own good, that it wasn't habit that had him lying flat on his back in the black of the night, staring at the ceiling and counting the knots in the wood. It was Evelyn Harper. 31 years old, born in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. The daughter of a schoolteacher and a man who had once worked for the Postal Service before his lungs gave out. She liked roses, but had written that she'd learned to grow lavender because it was hardier and didn't demand as much. She believed a person's character showed itself most clearly in how they treated horses and children. She had written in her 3rd letter that she was not a woman who scared easy, and Luke had read that line so many times, the paper had softened to velvet along the fold. He had her letters in a cigar box under his bed, 14 of them over 8 months. He knew them the way he knew the land, not perfectly but deeply, in the way a man knows something he has walked over in all kinds of weather. He had not told anyone in Sunset Ridge about her. Not because he was ashamed, but because the hope felt fragile, and this town had a way of handling fragile things roughly. Men like Earl Dugan at the feed store, who laughed too easily at other men's wanting. Women like Loretta Finch, who made pity sound like conversation. Luke had kept Evelyn Harper to himself, folded up and private like a deed to land he hadn't finished paying for yet. But she was coming today. She was coming today, and he had wildflowers in his fist. And he had put on his good shirt. The dark one, the one he saved for funerals, and the 4th of July. And he had told himself standing at the water pump that morning, while the sky turned red behind the hills, that a man was allowed to want something. A man was allowed to stand on a train platform in his good shirt, with store-bought flowers, and believe that the next chapter of his life was about to step off a westbound train. He was allowed that. The Sunset Ridge platform was not a dignified place to wait. It was 3 warped boards, a rusted bench, and a posted schedule, so old half the towns listed on it had changed their names. There were 6 other people waiting. The Brennan brothers picking up lumber. Old Gus Whitfield, collecting a package, and a woman Luke didn't recognize, who stood with her arms crossed and her back to the wind like she was used to both. Luke stood apart from all of them near the end of the platform where the tracks bent south. He checked his watch 4 times in 10 minutes. The train was late by 20 minutes, which meant nothing because the train was always late. The line that ran through Sunset Ridge had a reputation for arriving when it felt like it, and leaving before you were ready, and the station master, a thin put-upon man named Beckwith, had long since stopped apologizing for it. Luke heard it before he saw it, the low vibration in the rails, the distant groan of steam, then the whistle, 2 sharp blasts cutting through the dry morning air. He straightened up, pressed the wildflowers against his leg so they wouldn't look too deliberate, pushed his hat back half an inch, and then pushed it forward again. The train rolled in with a sound like the whole world sighing. The doors opened. People moved. Trunks came off. The Brennan brothers argued about the weight of something. Gus Whitfield shuffled forward with his receipt. The unknown woman unfolded her arms and stepped toward the steps. And then Luke saw her. She came off the train last, which he would think about later. He would think about how she had waited standing just inside the door watching the platform clear before she stepped down. A woman who did not rush or could not rush, or had learned to stand at the edge of something terrible long enough to make peace with the crossing of it. She was dark-haired. She wore a brown dress that had seen better days, and she carried a single bag, and she was holding onto the rail with both hands when she stepped down onto the platform, not because she was unsteady, but because she seemed to be bracing herself for something. Luke stepped forward. Evelyn. The name left him before he could stop it, before he could think, before any of the careful things he had planned to say could arrange themselves into sense. It flew out of him loud and open the way a man shouts when he's spotted something he's been looking for in the dark. She turned. Her face did something complicated. Something moved through her eyes, grief or recognition, or the particular expression of a person hearing the wrong name spoken with too much love. And then it steadied, and she looked at him, and she stepped toward him, and she stopped. She was close enough now that he could see the shadows under her eyes, could see that she had been crying, not recently, but often. Could see that she had packed light, not because she traveled light, but because she had left in a hurry, or left in grief, or left not knowing how long she would need to stay. "You're Luke Callahan," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am." He held out the wildflowers and then felt immediately foolish and almost pulled them back. Yes." She looked at the flowers for a moment. Something in her face went soft and then tight again, like a door blown open and closed by the same wind. "Mr. Callahan," she said. "My name is Clara Harper. I'm Evelyn's sister." Luke blinked. Evelyn asked me." Clara stopped, pressed her lips together hard, started again. "There's no easy way to say this, and I thought about it the whole way here every mile, and I never found one, so I'm just going to say it plainly." "All right," Luke said, though his voice came out strange and flat, like a note played on a string pulled too tight. "Evelyn passed away," Clara said. 7 months ago. It was her heart. She'd had trouble with it since she was a girl, but it got worse last winter, and then in March, she stopped again. In March, she was gone. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Mr. Callahan." The wildflowers were still in his hand. He became aware of them the way a man becomes aware of something he is holding when he no longer knows why he is holding it. His fingers were still closed around the stems. The yellow petals were slightly crushed where he'd been gripping them without realizing. 7 months, he said. "Yes." "The letters," he said. Clara's jaw tightened. She didn't look away from him, and he would give her credit for that later, because a lesser person would have looked away. "That was me," she said. "After she died. She asked me before she went to write to you, to tell you. But I couldn't do it in a letter. I didn't know how to say it in a letter, so she exhaled. "I kept writing, as her. I know how that sounds. I know what it was. I'm not asking you to understand it right now. I just needed you to hear it from a person face to face, not from paper." The platform had gone quiet around them, or maybe it hadn't. Maybe the Brennan brothers were still arguing, and Gus Whitfield was still shuffling, and the station master was still calling out whatever station masters called out. But none of it was reaching Luke. He was standing in a pocket of stillness that had closed around him the moment she said Evelyn passed away, and he could not seem to move out of it. "She knew about me," he said. "She knew she was sick, and she didn't want to stop the letters," Clara said, and her voice cracked for the first time. She controlled it quickly, but he heard it. "She said you deserved someone, Luke, Mr. Callahan. She said you'd been alone long enough, and she didn't want her dying to take that away from you too. She was—" A pause. "She was stubborn like that, about what people deserved." Luke set the wildflowers down on the bench next to him. He set them down carefully like they were something precious, and then he put both hands in his pockets and stood very still for a moment. "She knew," he said again. Not a question this time. Not anything really, just the words finding out. She knew, Clara said. She made me promise. And the last letter. He looked up. The one that said she'd be on the May 12th train. Clara nodded short and tight. That was you. Yes. You came. I promised her I would. Something shifted in Clara's expression, a kind of helpless defiance, like a woman who has done a thing she isn't sure was right, but would do again the same way. I know that makes it worse, maybe. I know you were expecting. I know what you were expecting, and I'm not that. I'm not her. I'm not even close to her. But she asked me to look you in the eye and say it out loud, and I owed her that, so here I am. Luke looked at her for a long moment. She was taller than he'd imagined Evelyn to be, though he'd never asked. Her eyes were dark brown, or maybe black in this light, and they were steady in a way that cost her something to maintain. He could see that plainly. She was holding herself the way a person holds themselves when they are trying very hard not to break in front of a stranger, and she was not quite succeeding, though she was closer to succeeding than most people would have been. Where are you going? He asked. After this. Clara blinked. I back east. I have a ticket for the Friday train. You came all this way for one conversation. I came all this way because I made a promise. Luke picked the wildflowers back up off the bench. He didn't hand them to her this time, just held them, turning them over slowly in his fingers. Miss Harper, he said. Did she tell you much about me, about the ranch? Some? Clara said carefully. She shared your letters with me. Not all of them, I think, but some. Then you know I'm short-handed, and that the East Field's been giving me trouble since the spring thaw, and that the woman I was expecting to share the work with is gone. He paused. I'm not saying that to be cruel. I'm just saying it plainly. I understand. I've got a room, he said. It was supposed to be, I fixed it up. It's got a window that faces east. I was told women like windows that face east. He stopped, looked away, looked back. I'm not asking you to be her. I'm not asking you to be anything. But if you need a few days before you go back, you're welcome to them. And if you decide you want to work, there's work. Clara stared at him. Mr. Callahan, she said slowly. You're offering me a room. I'm offering you a room and honest work. Nothing more or less than that. I just told you I deceived you for 7 months. You told me you kept a promise to a dying woman, he said. I've heard worse reasons for a thing. She was quiet for a moment. The wind came through the platform and lifted a strand of hair across her face, and she pushed it back with one rough, quick gesture. I don't know anything about ranching, she said. I don't know anything about... He stopped himself. I'll teach you what you need to know. I'm not her. I heard you the first time. Another silence. Longer this time. Clara Harper looked at the wildflowers in his hand, and then looked at the train behind her, and then looked at Luke Callahan. This man she had written to for 7 months in a dead woman's voice. This man who had just had his entire future handed back to him in pieces. And she said quietly, 2 days. I'll stay 2 days. That's fine, Luke said. He did not smile. She did not smile. They stood on that cracked platform in the Texas morning with the last of the train smoke drifting past them, and it was the most ordinary and the most terrible moment Luke Callahan had experienced in a long time. He picked up her bag before she could object and started walking toward the wagon. After a moment, she followed. Twice. The ride to the ranch was mostly silent, which was fine by Luke. He had never been a man who felt the need to fill silence. He had lived alone long enough that silence had become something closer to company than absence, and he drove the wagon with his eyes on the road and let Clara Harper sit beside him without asking anything of her. She sat straight. Her hands were folded in her lap, but not relaxed. They were folded the way you fold something when you're trying to keep it from flying apart. She watched the land go by with the particular attention of someone who is trying to understand a place by looking at it, which Luke recognized because he had done the same thing when he first came to Sunset Ridge 10 years ago, broke and 22, and thinking that if he just looked hard enough at something, he could figure out what it owed him. It didn't owe you anything he had learned. The land didn't owe you anything. It just was dry and enormous and indifferent, and you either worked it or you didn't, and it rewarded you or it didn't, and none of that had anything to do with what you deserved. She talked about you, Clara said without warning. Luke kept his eyes on the road. I figured. She said you were kind. A pause. She said that was the thing she noticed first in your letters. That you were genuinely kind, not performed kind. She said there was a difference, and that most men only had the second kind. She was perceptive. She was the smartest person I ever knew, Clara said, and her voice went flat and careful in the way voices go flat when the feeling behind them is too big for the room. She was the smartest person, and the most stubborn, and the most she never stopped even when she was sick. She was reading up until the last 2 weeks, correcting my grammar, telling me what herbs to put in the tea. She corrected my grammar too, Luke said. In the letters. Clara made a sound that was almost a laugh. She said you didn't mind, Clara said. I didn't. I figured if she was correcting me, she was paying attention. That's exactly what she said you'd say. The wagon hit a rut and swayed, and Clara put one hand out to steady herself on the seat. Briefly, just a touch, and then pulled it back. She described the ranch, Clara said. The way you wrote about it. She said it sounded like a place a person could grow into. Still working on that part myself, Luke said. She was going to try to help with the accounts, Clara said. She mentioned that. She kept books for a hardware store back home for 3 years. She was good with numbers. I know. She mentioned it. I can do that, Clara said. Luke looked at her then. She was looking straight ahead, jaw set, not looking at him, but he could see by the angle of her profile that she had decided something. The accounts, she said. I'm better with numbers than I am with horses, I'd wager. If there's a ledger that needs looking at, I can look at it. You said 2 days. 2 days is 2 days. I can still look at a ledger in 2 days. He returned his eyes to the road. Ledger's in the desk drawer, he said. Second one down. The ink's running low, so go easy with the pen. All right. They didn't speak again until the ranch came into view, low and dry, against the flat land with the garden beds along the south fence that Luke had put in the week before. He had put them in for Evelyn, who had written that she missed green things and wanted to try growing something in the Texas soil. He had not touched them since he learned she was dead because every time he looked at them he couldn't think what to do with them. Clara looked at the garden beds for a long time as the wagon pulled up. She would have liked those, she said. I know, Luke said. He climbed down and offered her his hand, and after a moment she took it, stepping down with the careful steadiness of a woman who does not accept help easily, but knows when it would be foolish to refuse it. She stood in the yard with her bag at her feet and looked at the ranch, the fence that needed mending on the west side, the barn that was solid but needed paint, the window on the east side of the main house where the morning light was already laying itself across the glass in a long gold stripe, and she didn't say anything. You can put your bag in the room on the right, Luke said. I'll get the horse settled and then we can eat. There's biscuits left from this morning if you're hungry. Mr. Callahan, she said. Luke, he said, already walking toward the barn. Nobody calls me Mr. Callahan. She was quiet. Thank you, she said finally, and the words came out smaller than she had probably meant them to, stripped down and honest in the way things get when a person is too tired to dress them up. Don't thank me yet, he said without turning around. You haven't seen the ledger. He heard her exhale behind him. Not quite a laugh, not quite relief, somewhere between the two. And he kept walking, and the morning settled around the Callahan ranch the way it always did, dry and wide, and full of the particular silence of land that is waiting to see what you'll make of it. Inside, Clara set her bag on the bed in the east-facing room, and stood at the window for a moment, looking at the garden beds, the empty, turned earth, the small wooden stakes Luke had put in to mark the rows. She had not expected this. Not the room, not the offer. Not the man who had just received the worst news of his private life and responded by picking up her bag. She had expected anger. She had prepared for anger the entire way across the country, sitting on hard train seats with her hands folded and her jaw set, rehearsing the words, steadying herself for the blast. She had not prepared for this. She sat down on the edge of the bed, put her face in her hands, and for a moment she let herself feel the full weight of the last 7 months. The grief of watching Evelyn go, the loneliness of those months of letters of writing in her sister's voice to a man she had never met, of building without meaning to a picture of a person who was real and kind and waiting at a platform with wildflowers. And then she sat up straight, wiped her face with the back of her hand, and pulled herself together. 2 days, she had said. She had given herself 2 days. She crossed to the desk in the corner, opened the second drawer, and found the ledger. She opened it, and she saw immediately why it needed attention. The columns were off. Not badly, not dishonestly, just the careful errors of a man who was better at land than numbers, who had been keeping records alone without anyone to catch his rounding. 3 months of small discrepancies, nothing that couldn't be fixed in an afternoon. Clara Harper uncapped the pen, careful with the ink, and went to work. Outside, she could hear Luke moving in the barn, the low, steady sounds of a man attending to something that needed attending, to the particular rhythm of work that has no audience and asks for none. She bent over the ledger and let the numbers arrange themselves under her hand. She had said 2 days, but already some part of her, some quiet, grief-worn part that she had not yet gotten around to examining, was starting to understand that 2 days might not be the number she was going to end up with. She did not look at that understanding too closely. Not yet. She just kept writing in the east-facing room while the morning light moved across the window and the land outside lay flat and dry and full of the particular patience of things that are waiting to begin. Clara had been at the ledger for 3 hours when Luke came in and found her with ink on her fingers and a look on her face that he recognized from the mirror, the particular expression of someone who has found a problem they didn't go looking for. "You eat?" he asked. "Not yet." She didn't look up. "Luke, who is Harlan Briggs?" He went still in the doorway. "Why?" "Because his name appears 11 times in this ledger over the past 6 months, and every entry is a payment going out, not in. No notation of what for, no contract reference, no land description." She turned the ledger toward him and tapped the column with her finger. 11 payments, $430 total, to a man with no listed purpose. Luke crossed the room and looked at the page. He stood there for a moment without speaking. "He's a land broker," Luke said finally. "Or says he is. He came around last fall, said he was working on behalf of a development company. Said there was talk of the railroad coming through this part of the county and that some landowners might want to get ahead of it. Sell early at a decent price before the government forced it at a lower one. And you paid him $430 for this advice." "I paid him a retention fee," Luke said, and even saying it aloud he heard how it sounded. "He said it would secure my position in the negotiations, guarantee I'd be at the table when the time came." Clara closed the ledger. "Luke," she said carefully, "there is no railroad coming through this part of the county. You don't know that. I know that my father spent 20 years in the Postal Service, and before that he worked survey records for the state of Pennsylvania, and I grew up reading survey maps for entertainment, because it was that, or listen to my parents argue." She looked at him steadily. "The terrain east of here doesn't support a rail line. The grade is wrong. Any company worth their charter would know that inside of an afternoon, and any broker worth his fee would tell you the same." Luke sat down heavily in the chair across from the desk. "He seemed legitimate," he said. "They always do." A silence stretched between them. Outside, the wind picked up rattling something loose on the barn. "He's supposed to come back next month," Luke said, "for the final payment." "How much?" $200. Clara folded her hands on top of the ledger. "How much is this ranch worth, total land, stock, buildings?" Luke looked at her. "Why? Because I want to understand what's at stake before I tell you what I think you should do." He told her. She didn't flinch, which he respected. "All right," she said. "Here's what I think. I think Harlan Briggs found himself a man running a ranch alone. No partner, no one watching the books, and he sold you a story about a railroad that was never going to come. And I think if you make that final payment, he disappears, and you're out $630, and you have nothing but 11 lines in a ledger that don't prove a single thing." Luke was quiet for a long time. "I should have had someone look at this sooner," he said. "You didn't have anyone," Clara said. Not unkindly, just plainly. He looked up at her, and for a moment neither of them said anything, and the weight of that plain fact sat in the room between them like a third person. "Well," Luke said, finally standing up, "I've got someone now. For 2 days anyway." Clara picked up the pen. "Then let's not waste them." She was still at the ledger when he brought her food, cold biscuits and a cup of coffee that was stronger than anything she'd tasted in years, and she ate without stopping work, reading and checking and making small, careful notations in the margins. And Luke sat across from her and watched her work, and didn't say anything because there wasn't anything useful to say. He was starting to understand, in a way he hadn't expected, why Evelyn had described her sister the way she had. Smart, she had written in one of the early letters. "Clara is the one who figures things out. I'm the one who feels them. We used to joke that between the two of us, we made one complete person." He had smiled at that at the time, reading it by lamplight. He hadn't known then that he would ever meet the other half of that equation. The next morning started the way most trouble starts, quietly and before breakfast. Luke had gone into town for grain, and Clara had asked to come partly to see the town, and partly because she had the name Harlan Briggs in her head, and wanted to understand the landscape he was operating in. She had not said this to Luke. She had said she wanted fresh air, which was not entirely untrue. Sunset Ridge was small and sun-beaten, and arranged along a single main street with the kind of stubborn permanence of things that survive, not because they thrive, but because nothing has gotten around to finishing them off yet. She counted a feed store, a dry goods, a post office the size of a closet, a church, a saloon that was already generating noise at 10 in the morning, and a bank that had a flag out front, which meant someone important was expected, or had recently left. She waited outside the feed store while Luke went in. She had been standing there for maybe 4 minutes when the woman approached. She was well dressed by Sunset Ridge standards, which meant her dress fit her properly, and her hat matched it, and she walked with the particular confidence of a woman who has lived in one place long enough to feel she owns the sidewalk she's standing on. "You came in on the Tuesday train?" the woman said. It was not a question. "Yes, ma'am," Clara said. "You're the mail-order woman, Luke Callahan's." Clara kept her face even. "I'm Clara Harper. I'm visiting." "Visiting?" The woman tasted the word like it didn't agree with her. "From where? Pennsylvania. Long way to come for a visit." "It is," Clara agreed pleasantly. The woman looked her over with the unhurried inspection of someone who has decided they have the right to. Town was expecting Luke to bring a bride home. He's been a bit of a... She paused delicately. "Project. For some of the ladies here. So naturally people are curious." "Naturally," Clara said. "You don't look like a rancher's wife." "I'm not a rancher's wife." "No," the woman said, and smiled with just her mouth. "I suppose you're not." She tilted her head. "How long are you staying?" 2 days. The woman adjusted her hat. "Well, I hope Luke finds what he's looking for. Lord knows he's been alone long enough. It starts to change a man, you know. All that quiet." She walked away without another word, and Clara watched her go and thought about the 11 entries in the ledger and the town that had watched Luke Callahan struggle alone for 6 years and found it more interesting than troubling. Luke came out of the feed store with a receipt and immediately read something in Clara's face. "Who was that?" he asked. "Loretta Finch," Clara said. "I'm guessing." "Lord." He picked up the grain sack. "What did she say?" "Nothing that matters." She fell into step beside him. "Luke, does Harlan Briggs come into town often?" "Every few weeks." "Why?" "I want to see his paperwork. The contract he gave you for the retention fee." Luke stopped walking. "I don't have a contract." Clara stopped too. She turned and looked at him. He took a $430 retention, she said slowly, and he didn't give you a contract. He said it was coming, that he was having it drawn up proper. She looked at him for a moment, and she made a decision then not to say what she was thinking, which was that a man who had been alone too long sometimes trusted the first person who showed him a document and used words like legitimate and charter and development company because the loneliness made you want to believe that someone had thought you worth approaching in the first place. "All right," she said instead. "When he comes back, I want to be there." "Clara, he'll try to collect the final payment," she said. "And when he does, I want to see his face when someone asks him for the contract first." Luke stared at her. Something moved in his expression that she couldn't quite name, not quite surprise, not quite something else. Respect maybe, though he hadn't said the word, and she wasn't going to assume it. "You said 2 days," he said. "And today's only the 2nd, she said. "So we've got time." They drove back to the ranch mostly in silence, but it was a different silence from the one on the first ride. Less careful, less loaded. Just two people sitting together with their thoughts, which in Clara's experience was a much better kind of quiet. The trouble arrived before Harlan Briggs did. It arrived in the form of a boy, maybe 16, raw-boned and sun-darkened, galloping up to the Callahan ranch at a pace that said bad news better than any words could. He slid off the horse before it had fully stopped and hit the ground running, and nearly collided with Clara, who was coming out of the house with the ledger under her arm. "Ma'am?" He caught himself. "Is Mr. Callahan here? It's about the east pasture. The Greer fence, the whole north section went down, and Callahan's cattle are there mixed in with Greer stock. And old man Greer is already on his horse, and he ain't happy, ma'am. He ain't happy at all." Clara turned toward the barn. Luke. He appeared in the barn doorway at a near run, took one look at the boy, and had his horse saddled in 4 minutes flat. Clara watched him go with the particular feeling of someone who has just learned something useful about a person, the way he moved when something needed doing. No wasted motion, no complaint. Just the immediate and efficient response of a man who had been solving his own problems alone for a very long time. She looked at the ledger in her arms. She looked at the boy who was still standing there breathing hard. "How far is the east pasture?" she asked. "1.5 miles, ma'am, maybe 2. "Is there another horse in that barn that won't kill me?" The boy blinked. "There's the mare. She's gentle." "Show me." She had not been on a horse in 6 years. She did not mention this. She climbed up with more determination than Grace settled herself, and nudged the mare into motion, and the boy looked at her with the wide-eyed expression of someone recalculating their initial assessment of a person. By the time she reached the east pasture, Luke was already there, and so was Walter Greer, who was a large red-faced man on a large red-faced horse, and 3 ranch hands, who were doing the complicated work of separating 2 herds of cattle that had no interest in being separated. "Callahan!" Greer was bellowing. "This is the 3rd time this year. 3rd time. You can't keep fence, you can't keep cattle. What in the Sam Hill can you keep?" "Walter, I hear you and I'm fixing it. Fixing it. I'm counting 14 of mine mixed in with yours, and 2 of them are my best breeders, and if they've been—" "I'm fixing it," Luke said harder this time. "You've been saying that for 6 months, and every time that fence goes, it's my land. It goes toward Callahan, not yours, never yours." "Mr. Greer." Greer stopped. Clara had ridden up alongside Luke, and she was sitting straight on the mare, with the ledger still under her arm, which she was aware looked completely ridiculous, and she did not care. "Mr. Greer," she said again. "My name is Clara Harper. I'm handling Mr. Callahan's accounts. I'd like to propose a temporary solution while the fence is repaired, and I'd like to do it without either of you breaking a blood vessel if that's agreeable." Both men stared at her. "And who in the—" Greer started. "The east section of your property borders the dry creek bed," Clara said, because she had read it in the ledger notes, Luke's small, careful annotations about the land. "If we move the Callahan stock to the north section for the next 4 days while the fence is rebuilt, there's no overlap. Your breeders stay clear. Your hands don't have to babysit the line." She paused. And Mr. Callahan will cover the cost of any additional labor you need for the separation today. I'll note it in the accounts." Silence. Greer looked at Luke. "She always talked like that," Greer said. "I'm still figuring that out," Luke said. Greer looked at Clara again long and assessing, and then something in his big red face shifted. Not warmth exactly, but the particular expression of a man who has been handed a solution that works and has run out of reasonable objections. "4 days," Greer said. "And the fence gets done proper this time. Not that half-measure business from March." "Done," Luke said. Greer turned his horse and rode, and his hands began the work of sorting cattle. And Luke looked at Clara on the mare with the ledger under her arm, and said nothing for a moment. "You read the land notes," he said finally. "I read everything in the desk," she said. "I told you I was good with records." "Clara." He said her name with a weight she hadn't heard in it before. Not formal, not the careful distance of the first day. Something else. "You didn't have to come out here." "No," she agreed. "I didn't." She turned the mare back toward the ranch, and she heard him follow behind her, and neither of them mentioned the fact that tomorrow was the last of her 2 days, because some things are better left in the silence, where they are slowly becoming something different than what they were. That night, she sat on the porch step after dark because she couldn't sleep. She had been sitting there maybe 20 minutes when the door opened behind her, and Luke came out and sat down 2 feet away, and he had 2 cups of coffee, and he set one beside her, without asking whether she wanted it, which she did, which he had apparently already known. "I was going to marry her," he said out of nowhere into the dark. "Evelyn, I had the ring." Clara wrapped her hands around the cup. "I know," she said softly. "I never met her, not once. We only had the letters." He was quiet for a moment. "That sounds foolish." "It doesn't. I built a whole life in my head," he said. "Based on 14 letters and a photograph. That's—" He stopped. "It's human," Clara said. "It's completely human, Luke." He looked out at the dark land. "She was real to me," he said, "whatever that's worth. She was real," Clara said. "She wasn't a story I made up to keep you writing. She was real, and she chose to write to you because she believed you were worth knowing even from 1,000 miles away, even when she knew." Clara stopped, her voice catching, and she steadied it. "Even when she knew she was running out of time. She kept writing because she wanted you to have someone." Luke turned and looked at her in the dark. "I know you're not her," he said. "I know you know that. I'm not asking you to be. I know that too." The night settled around them, and the coffee was warm, and neither of them moved, and somewhere across the dark pasture, one of the cattle lowed low and long, and it was the most ordinary sound in the world, and Clara Harper sat with it, and felt for the first time since March that the grief she was carrying had shifted slightly, redistributed its weight, the way a heavy thing does when 2 people are near enough to share the load, without either one of them having to ask. She had said 2 days. Tomorrow was the 2nd. She did not pick up the cup and go inside. She stayed where she was in the dark, 2 feet from a man she had not expected to understand, and she let the night do what nights do, quiet the noise clear, the air make room for the things that are still figuring out what they are. She didn't go to the station. The Friday train left Sunset Ridge at 9:47 in the morning, and Clara Harper knew the exact moment it did, because she heard the whistle from the ranch, 2 sharp blasts cutting through the dry air, and she was standing at the kitchen table, with her coffee going cold, and the ledger open in front of her, and she listened to the whistle fade south, and she did not move. Luke was in the barn. He didn't come in to ask. He didn't say a word about the train, or the ticket, or the 2 days that had stretched into 3, and were now stretching into something without a number attached to it. He just came in at 10:30, poured himself coffee, looked at her over the rim of the cup, and said, "East Fence crew's coming at noon. Greer's sending 2 of his hands to help." "Good," Clara said. "You want to be here when they come." "I want to be here when Harlan Briggs comes," she said, "which I'm guessing will be before the end of the week. He usually comes on Fridays. Then today's his day." She turned a page in the ledger. "I found something else last night." Luke set his cup down. There's a notation here from 8 months ago, she said. Before broached you. It's in different ink. Someone went back and added it, I think, after the original entry. It references a land survey number, T14 range 6 section 9. She looked up at him. Do you know what parcel that is? That's the South 40, Luke said slowly. The section that runs along the dry creek. The same section that borders Walter Greer's property. Yes. Luke, she said, who else knew about the trouble you were having with that fence line, about the boundary dispute? He thought about it. Greer, obviously, his hands. Beckwith at the station, I mentioned it once. And... He stopped. And Briggs, he said. He was there one afternoon when Greer and I had words about it, last September. He rode up while we were still arguing. Clara closed the ledger. He wasn't there by accident, she said. The fence crew arrived at noon. Clara stayed at the desk and let the men work running numbers, cross-referencing dates. Building the picture piece by piece, the way her father had taught her to read a survey map. Start at the corners and work inward, because the truth of a thing lives at its edges. By 2 o'clock, she had what she needed. By 2:15, Harlan Briggs rode up the drive. She heard him before she saw him. The particular easy rhythm of a man who arrives, places like he's been expected, and welcomed his horse, moving at a comfortable trot. No hurry, no tension, just the comfortable pace of someone who has done this particular errand many times before and expects it to go the same way it always has. Luke came in from the yard. He's here, he said. I know. Clara stood up, tucked the ledger under her arm, and straightened her collar. Don't say anything to start. Let him talk. Clara. Luke. She looked at him. Please. He looked at her for a moment, jaw tight, and then he nodded once, and they walked outside together. Harlan Briggs was a well-constructed lie of a man. That was the first thing Clara thought when she saw him, that everything about him had been assembled with care to communicate trustworthiness. The good hat, the clean boots, the wide, easy smile that arrived 3 full seconds before he'd even had time to assess the situation, which meant it wasn't a response to anything real, just a tool he kept deployed at all times. Luke. He swung down with the practiced ease of a man who spends a lot of time arriving on horseback at ranches where people weren't expecting bad news. Good to see you. I was hoping to catch you this week, actually. We've got some developments. His eyes moved to Clara. The smile didn't change, but something behind it recalibrated. And who's this kid? Clara Harper, Clara said. I'm handling Mr. Callahan's accounts. Is that right? The smile widened slightly, compensating. Well, that's just fine. Actually, this works out nicely because the paperwork I've been having drawn up. What survey number is attached to the development parcel you've been representing? Clara asked. Briggs blinked. Just once, just briefly, but she caught it. I'm sorry. The railroad development parcel, she said. The one that requires a retention fee before the landowner can participate in the negotiation. What is the survey number? Well, now, I don't have that off the top of my... Because it should match the area you've been describing, Clara said. And I've been looking at the county survey records referenced in Mr. Callahan's property deed, and I can't find a parcel in this range that would support a rail line. The grade east of here runs to 22 degrees past the creek bed. You'd need a 10-degree maximum for standard gauge track. She tilted her head slightly. But I'm sure you know that. You've been representing this development for 8 months. Briggs looked at her. The smile was still there, but it had gone thinner the way a thing gets thin when it's being pulled at from both ends. Ma'am, I don't know where you're getting your information, but the development company I represent has engineers who've assessed... What's the name of the company? Clara said. Continental Land and Rail Associates. Incorporated where? A pause. Small, controlled, but a pause. Missouri, he said. I'd like their charter number, Clara said. For the records. I don't carry that on my person. That's all right. I can write to the Missouri Secretary of State's office and request it myself. It'll take 2 weeks, maybe 3. She opened the ledger to the page she'd marked. In the meantime, I'd like the contract you promised Mr. Callahan when he paid the initial retention fee, the one that was being drawn up proper. Briggs's smile disappeared. It didn't fade. It disappeared the way a lamp goes out when someone blows it. And what was underneath it was not anger, not yet, but the cold, flat calculation of a man running numbers in his head, weighing options, deciding which move costs him least. "I can see," he said slowly, "that somebody's been filling your head with suspicions about a legitimate business arrangement." "I filled my own head," Clara said. "I'm good at that." "Luke!" Briggs turned to him, shifting his weight, changing targets. Man to man, leaving the difficult woman out of it. "We've had a solid arrangement. You know what I'm bringing to the table here. There's no need for all this." "She asked you for a contract," Luke said. Briggs stopped. "That's all she asked for," Luke said. "A contract. The one you told me was coming for 8 months. His voice was quiet and even, which Clara had already learned was more dangerous than loud. "If everything is legitimate, the contract exists, so produce it." A long silence. Briggs looked at Luke, looked at Clara, looked at the ledger under her arm with the particular hatred a man reserves for evidence. "I'm going to be honest with you," he said, and his voice had dropped the professional warmth, entirely leaving something underneath that was colder and more real. "There are people with a significant interest in this county's land situation, people with resources, and those people appreciate cooperation from local landowners, and they don't take well to complications." "Is that a threat?" Luke asked. "It's a description of a situation," Briggs said. "I'm trying to help you understand the landscape." "The landscape," Clara said, "currently shows $430 paid out of Mr. Callahan's accounts with no corresponding contract, no verified company, and no legal documentation of any kind. Under Texas property law, that constitutes an unrecovered debt, which Mr. Callahan has grounds to pursue." She closed the ledger. "And if you've made similar arrangements with other landowners in this county, which I suspect you have given, that you've been working this territory for the better part of a year, that starts to look less like a private dispute and more like a pattern." Briggs stared at her. "Who are you?" he said, and for the first time he sounded genuinely thrown. "I told you," Clara said. "I handle the accounts." Something shifted in Briggs then. The cold calculation hardened into something uglier, and he took one step forward, not toward Clara, but angling toward Luke in the way men do when they want to exclude a woman from a confrontation by physically positioning her outside of it. Luke moved. It was a small movement, half a step, a shift of weight, but it put him precisely between Briggs and Clara, and he did it with the same unhurried efficiency he'd brought to saddling the horse and sorting the cattle and every other practical problem that had required him to act. "I think you'd better leave," Luke said. "Luke, you don't understand what you're walking away from." "I understand it fine," Luke said. "I understand I paid 6 months of good money to a man who sold me a story. I understand I almost paid 200 more. And I understand—" He paused. "I understand that if you come back on this property again, we're going to have a different kind of conversation. Now ride." Briggs stood there for 3 full seconds. Then he turned, mounted his horse, and left the way he came at the same easy trot, same comfortable pace, but his spine was rigid now, and the ease was a performance, and all 3 of them knew it. The dust settled. Clara let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "He'll be back," she said. "I know. He's not working alone. He said people with resources, that's not one man running a land scheme. There's a company, or there's someone with a stake in this county's deeds, and Briggs is the front man." She was already turning back toward the house, thinking, if he's done this to other ranchers, there's a record of it somewhere. The county land office would have the deed transfers. If people have been selling under pressure, Clara. Luke caught her arm gently, just enough to stop her forward motion. She turned. He was looking at her with an expression she had not seen on him before. Not the careful flatness of a man managing grief, not the quiet efficiency of a man managing work, but something open and undefended and a little bit helpless, like a door blown off its hinges by something that turned out not to be a storm. "Thank you," he said. It was 2 words, Plain and direct, the way everything with him was plain and direct, and she felt them more than she expected to. "Don't thank me," she said. "He'll make trouble before this is over." "I know that too." He released her arm. "I'm thanking you anyway." She didn't argue. She went inside, and she sat at the desk, and she opened the ledger to a clean page, and she began writing down every question she needed to answer before the trouble Harlan Briggs was going to make came back around. It came back sooner than either of them expected. Not Briggs himself. Something worse. 2 days later, a letter arrived from the Sunset Ridge Land Office. Luke brought it in from the post without opening it, set it on the table in front of Clara, the way a man sets down something he's not sure of, and Clara looked at the return address and felt the particular cold feeling of someone who has been expecting bad news in a specific form and just watched it arrive in exactly that form. She opened it. She read it twice. "Luke," she said, "sit down." He sat. "Someone has filed a competing land claim on the South 40, she said. "The section along the creek. Filed 3 days ago." She looked up. "The claimant is Continental Land and Rail Associates." The silence that followed was the kind that has weight and temperature. "They can't do that," Luke said. "I have the deed. I've had it for 6 years. They're claiming the original survey was in error," Clara said, reading. "That the boundary placement along the creek bed was incorrectly recorded at the county level, and that the South 40-acre parcel was never legally incorporated into the Callahan property title." "That's a lie." "Yes," she said. "It is. And it's a very specific kind of lie, which means someone went to the trouble of researching your deed carefully enough to find the exact language to challenge." She set the letter down. This is what the retention fee was for. It wasn't a railroad deal. It was Briggs getting paid to identify vulnerable parcels land with survey language loose enough to challenge owned by people working alone, no lawyers, no partners checking the paperwork. She looked at him steadily. He was never going to help you. He was building a case against you. Luke stood up from the table. He walked to the window. He stood there with his back to her, and she gave him that moment because he'd earned it. "How long do I have?" he said. "The notice requires a response within 30 days, or the claim goes to a hearing by default." 30 days. He turned around. "Can we fight it, eh?" "Yes," she said. "But we need the original survey documents, the ones that were filed when your deed was recorded. If the county kept copies, and they should have, we can compare them to whatever Continental's filing claims, and if there's a discrepancy, that's evidence of document fraud." "The county land office," he said. "First thing tomorrow morning," she said. He looked at her across the table. The ledger was between them, open to the clean page where she'd been writing her questions, and the letter from the land office was sitting on top of it. And outside the window, the South 40 stretched flat and dry toward the creek bed. The same land it had always been, indifferent, as always, to the trouble people kept trying to make about it. "You know what I keep thinking about," Luke said. "What?" "Evelyn told me in one of the first letters she said she was coming west because she wanted to be useful somewhere." He paused. "She said she was tired of being decorative." Clara felt something move in her chest. "She said that," Clara confirmed softly. "I thought I understood it at the time," Luke said. "I don't think I really did until—" He stopped, shook his head slightly. She would have liked this. The ledger and the argument and all of it. She would have been delighted by the whole damn thing. She would have been insufferable about it, Clara said. She would have talked about it for weeks. Luke almost smiled. It didn't quite make it all the way, but it was close. "Tomorrow morning," he said. "County land office. First thing," Clara confirmed. "And tonight." She pulled the ledger toward her. "Tonight, I write down everything we know in order with dates. If this goes to a hearing, we need a clear record." "All right," he said. He went to the stove and poured 2 cups of coffee. The routine of it already settled into ease, already natural, already theirs, and he brought hers over without asking. And she took it without looking up. And neither of them mentioned that she had not rebooked a train, and the ticket in her bag had a date on it that had come and gone 3 days ago, quiet as the turn of a page. The lamp burned late, and in the county land office 3 miles south of Sunset Ridge, in a filing drawer that had not been opened in 6 years, a survey document sat waiting, holding in its careful measured lines either Luke Callahan's salvation or his ruin. Tomorrow, they would find out which. The county land office opened at 8 in the morning, and Clara and Luke were there at 7:55. The clerk was a thin man named Aldous Fry, who wore his authority the way small men in small offices often wear it, pressed in close to himself, applied carefully deployed at the first hint that someone might not take it seriously. He looked at Luke with the mild recognition of a man who knows a face without knowing the name, and he looked at Clara with the particular blankness of someone who has decided a woman in a land office is either someone's wife or someone's problem. "We need to pull the original survey records for the Callahan property," Clara said. "Deed filed 6 years ago. T14 Range 6, the South Parcel Boundary Documentation." Fry looked at her over his spectacles. "Records requests need to be submitted in writing," he said. "There's a form." "We'll fill out the form," Clara said, "while you pull the file. The form needs to be submitted and reviewed before." "Mr. Fry." She set the land office notice on his counter. "This is a competing claim filed 3 days ago against that same parcel. Mr. Callahan has 30 days to respond. We need the original survey to mount a defense. That is a legal right, not a courtesy, and I'd rather not spend the morning explaining to a circuit judge why the county land office obstructed a property rights dispute by requiring a man to wait 2 weeks for a form to be reviewed." She paused. "But I'll explain it if I need to." Fry stared at her. He picked up the notice. "Read it. Set it down." "Wait here," he said. He went into the back room. Luke stood beside Clara at the counter and kept his voice low. "Where'd you learn to talk like that?" he said. "My father dealt with postal disputes for 20 years, she said. "Bureaucrats respond to 2 things, process and consequence. You lead with process, you follow with consequence, and you say the word judge early." "Does it always work?" "No," she said, "but it worked today." Fry returned 8 minutes later. He did not have a file folder. He had an expression. "There's a problem," he said. Clara went still. "The survey documentation for T14 Range 6 South Parcel, it was pulled for review 2 days ago." He set his hands flat on the counter. "Standard procedure when a competing claim is filed. The documents are held by the Claims Review Office until the hearing." "Held by whom specifically?" Clara asked. "Deputy Claims Officer Wendell Cole," Fry said. "He handles all contested parcel documentation." "I want to speak with him." "He's not in the office today." "When will he be in?" A pause that was a half-second too long. "Monday," Fry said. Luke made a sound that was not quite a word. Clara put her hand briefly on his arm without looking at him. "Mr. Fry," she said carefully, "is there a copy of the original filing? A duplicate survey documents of this age were typically filed in duplicate, one for the county, one for the State Land Commissioner's office." Fry blinked. Something moved behind his eyes. Not guilt exactly, but the look of a man who has just realized the game he's been placed in has more moves than he knew about. "The state office would have their copy, yes," he said slowly. "In Austin." "How long for a records request to Austin?" "A week, maybe 10 days. "Then we'll send it today," Clara said. "I'll need paper in the proper address format." Fry gave her the paper. He gave it to her without argument this time, and she stood at his counter and wrote the request out in full in her clearest hand, with every survey number and deed reference and legal citation she could pull from memory and from the notes she'd tucked into the ledger that morning before they left. She handed it to him. "Post it today," she said, "not tomorrow." "Yes, ma'am," Fry said, and this time the ma'am sounded almost like he meant it. Outside, Luke walked 3 steps ahead of himself before he stopped and turned around. "Cole," he said. "Wendell Cole." "You know him?" "Not well. I've seen him around. He's been the deputy claims officer for about 2 years. Luke's jaw was working. "He was at the feed store the day Briggs was there. The first time I met Briggs. Cole was picking up an order. Clara looked at him. You're sure? I'm sure, Luke said. I remember because they nodded at each other. I thought nothing of it. Two men who know each other in a small town. He shook his head. They're working together. Or Cole works for whoever Briggs works for, Clara said. Which means the competing claim didn't just get filed. It got filed with someone on the inside already positioned to control the documentation. She started walking. We need to find out who else Briggs has done this to. They found out faster than expected, and from a source neither of them anticipated. Walter Greer was coming out of the dry goods when they crossed the main street, and he stopped when he saw them, with the particular arrested look of a man who has been carrying something heavy and has just spotted someone who might be able to help him put it down. Callahan, he said. Good. I was going to come out to your place today. What's wrong? Luke said. Greer looked at Clara. You're the woman who settled the fence business. Yes, Clara said. You handle accounts, the boy said. I do. Greer pulled an envelope from his coat and held it out. I got one of these, he said. 3 days ago. Clara opened it, read it. It was the same notice. Different parcel number, same claimant. Continental Land and Rail Associates. Same language about survey errors, same 30-day window. They came after your east section, she said. The section that borders Callahan's South 40, Greer said, and his voice was a controlled anger, the kind that has been sitting and tightening for 3 days. Now I'm no fool. I know what this is. Somebody wants the creek bedland, both sides of it. He looked at Luke. Somebody wants the water rights. The three of them stood there on the main street of Sunset Ridge in the morning sun and let that settle. Water rights, Luke said. There's no railroad coming, Greer said flatly. I knew that from the beginning, but I figured Briggs was just a grifter running a small game. I didn't think... He stopped. The creek doesn't look like much, but it's the only reliable water source in a 20-mile radius that runs year-round. If someone controls both banks... They control every ranch in this valley, Clara said. Silence. How many ranches draw from that creek? She asked. 6, Luke said. 7 if you count the Haskell place on the north end. And how many of them have gotten a notice like this? Greer and Luke looked at each other. I don't know, Luke said. We need to find out, Clara said. Today. They split up. Luke rode north toward the Haskell place and the 2 ranches beyond. Clara went with Greer to the 3 properties on the south side of the creek. She rode with him on the wagon, which was faster than she'd expected, because Greer drove with the grim urgency of a man who has decided something needs doing and has stopped being polite about it. The first ranch, the Alderman place, confirmed it within 60 seconds. Margaret Alderman, a widow who ran her property with her son, and a hired hand, had the same letter, had received it 4 days ago, and had been sitting on it because she didn't know what it meant and was afraid to ask. I thought I'd done something wrong, she said, standing in her doorway with the notice in her hand. I thought maybe there'd been a mistake on my deed when I took it over after Thomas died. There was no mistake on your deed, Clara said. Someone is trying to make you believe there was. They need you to feel uncertain, so that when they offer to settle quietly and buy you out, you take the offer rather than fight. She looked at the woman steadily. Don't take any offer, not yet. We're building a case. Who's we? Margaret said. Mr. Callahan, Mr. Greer and the other landowners along the creek, Clara said. There's strength in the number. 1 person fighting this looks like a dispute. 6 people fighting it looks like fraud. Margaret Alderman looked at her for a long moment. You're not from here, she said. No, ma'am. But you're angry about this, Margaret said. On our behalf. Clara paused. She thought about that. Yes, she said. I suppose I am. By evening they had 4 confirmations. 4 ranches along the creek, 4 identical notices, all filed within the same 3-day window. Luke had found 2 more on the north side, 6 total. Every landowner sitting alone with the same letter, each one thinking they were the only one, each one made to feel small and confused and legally uncertain. They gathered at the Callahan Ranch that night. 6 people around a table that had never held that many, and Clara stood at the head of it with the ledger and the notices spread out and said the thing plainly because plain was the only useful way to say it. "Someone has spent the better part of a year setting this up," she said. "Briggs collected fees from at least 3 of you, Mr. Callahan, Mr. Greer, and Mrs. Alderman's neighbor to the north. He was identifying which properties were worth targeting and which owners were isolated enough to pressure. The competing claims were filed all at once, which is how they wanted it. 6 people overwhelmed simultaneously, no time to coordinate, no time to fight. So what do we do?" Margaret Alderman's son, a young man named Thomas Jr., leaned forward. "We can't all hire lawyers, not in 30 days. "We don't need to hire lawyers," Clara said. "We need the original survey documents, which should prove Continental's claims are based on falsified boundary descriptions. I've submitted a request to the State Land Commissioner's office in Austin for certified copies. If those arrive in time, and if we can show the discrepancy between the original survey and Continental's filing, that's evidence of document fraud, which is a criminal matter, not just a civil one." "If they arrive in time," Greer said. "Yes," Clara said. "That's the problem." "What's the other option?" Luke said. She looked at him. "The circuit judge comes through Sunset Ridge in 3 weeks, she said. "Judge Elias Horn. I checked the court calendar at the land office while Fry was getting my paper. Horn has jurisdiction over property fraud cases in this county." 3 weeks, Luke said. "If we can document the pattern, all 6 notices, the connection between Briggs and Cole, the retention fees paid without contracts, and present it as a single fraud case rather than 6 individual disputes, Horn can issue an injunction that stops the competing claims from proceeding until a full investigation is complete." "That buys us time," Margaret said. "That buys us everything," Clara said. "Time is what they don't want us to have. Every day they can keep us apart and confused is a day closer to the hearing where the claims go through by default." Thomas Jr. looked up. "You know a lot about property law for an accountswoman." Clara held his gaze. "I know a lot about what happens to people who get taken advantage of because no one was watching the paperwork," she said. "I've seen it before." The room was quiet. Luke spoke from across the table. "She's right about all of it," he said, and his voice had the flat certainty of a man who has stopped deliberating. "And I say we do it. All of us together. We put every document on this table, we build the case, and we're waiting when Horn rides in." One by one they agreed. They stayed until nearly 10, working through it. Clara organized the documents into a single sequence, chronological cross-referenced, each fraudulent claim mapped against the original deed language it was attempting to exploit. She wrote it in a clean hand on fresh paper, making 2 copies of everything, because she had learned from her father that the only document that matters in a dispute is the one you kept twice. When the last of them had gone, the ranch was quiet again, and Luke was banking the fire, and Clara was stacking the papers into careful order, and neither of them spoke for a while. "Cole's going to know we're building something," Luke said finally. "He'll tell Briggs." "Yes," Clara said. "That might make things move faster than we want them to." "Probably." "You're not worried?" She looked up at him. "Of course I'm worried. I'm terrified." She said it plainly without apology. "But terrified is different from stopped. I'm not stopped." Luke looked at her across the table with all the papers between them, and the lamp burning low, and the fire settling into embers, and something in his expression was doing the thing it had been doing more and more frequently, that open, undefended thing she hadn't figured out what to do with yet. "Clara," he said. She waited. "When this is over—" The sound of hoofbeats cut him off. Not one horse. Multiple. Coming fast up the drive in the dark. Luke was on his feet before the sound had fully registered. He crossed to the door and opened it, and Clara was right behind him, and the lamplight spilled out onto the drive, where 3 riders had pulled up hard, their horses breathing. The one in front was not Briggs. It was Wendell Cole. And behind him were 2 men Clara had never seen, and one of them was holding a document, and he held it up in the lamplight with the particular deliberate gesture of someone making a point. "Callahan," Cole said. There's been an amendment to the competing claim, filed this afternoon. He didn't bother with any pretense of official courtesy. Now includes the main ranch parcel, all of it, not just the South 40. Luke said nothing. You've got 24 hours to respond, Cole said, or the hearing is automatically expedited. That means next week, not 30 days. Your choice. He looked past Luke to Clara, and his gaze was flat and assessing, and not friendly. And you might want to think carefully about what kind of case you're building, miss, before you build it so loud that the people you're building it against decide to make the next 30 days very uncomfortable for everyone on this creek. He turned his horse. They rode out the way they came, fast and dark, and the sound of them faded into the night, and Luke stood in the doorway with his hand on the frame and his jaw set and his eyes on the dark road, and Clara stood behind him and understood with the particular cold clarity that comes after a threat that the 30 days they thought they had just became something much shorter and much more dangerous. They know, she said. Yes, Luke said. They're scared of what we're building. Yes, that means we're building the right thing. He turned and looked at her, and his eyes had that quality again, that undefended open quality. Except now, it was mixed with something she recognized as the same thing she felt in her own chest. The particular combination of fear and resolve that a person arrives at when they have decided the thing they are standing next to is worth standing next to. We need to move faster, he said. I know, she said. Come back inside. He did. The lamp burned all the way down that night, and neither of them stopped working until there was nothing left to do but wait for morning to make the next move. Morning came in hard and fast, the way it does when you've been awake most of the night waiting for it. Clara had the papers organized into 3 stacks before Luke finished his coffee. 1 stack for each parcel affected one master document laying out the full timeline of Continental's operation, and 1 separate page listing every name connected to it that she could prove. Briggs. Cole. The 2 men who had ridden up behind Cole in the dark. She didn't have the name at the top, yet the person who had funded and directed the scheme, but she had enough of the structure that a judge could follow the money himself. I need to get to the telegraph office, she said, before 8. Why? Because I need to send a wire to the State Land Commissioner's office in Austin, and I need to send it before Cole or Briggs think to do anything that might delay the records request I filed yesterday. You think they'd interfere with a state records request? I think they've already interfered with the county survey documents, she said. I'm not assuming anything is safe that I haven't secured myself. Luke had the wagon hitched in 10 minutes. The telegraph operator, a young man who seemed to survive entirely on nervous energy and black coffee, took Clara's message without comment and sent it while she stood at the counter and watched, which, she could tell, unnerved him. But she did not particularly care. The message was addressed to the office of the Texas State Land Commissioner, marked urgent, and cited the deed numbers of all 6 disputed parcels, the case number from the competing claims filing, and a specific request for certified survey copies to be transmitted by return telegraph where possible and by express rider where not. She had written the message out in advance. It was 43 words long, which was 11 words under the cheapest telegraph rate, and she handed the operator the coins for it from the small purse she'd been carrying since Pennsylvania. Outside, Luke was waiting with the wagon. Now what? He said. Now we go tell the others that the timeline has changed, she said. And then we find out when exactly Judge Horn arrives, because 24 hours means Cole wants to push this to a hearing before Horn even gets to town. And if that happens... Horn arrives Thursday, said a voice behind them. They both turned. Walter Greer was standing on the boardwalk with his hat in his hands, and his son beside him, a younger, broader version of the same man with the same set to his jaw. I sent my boy to the court circuit office last night, Greer said. After the meeting. Thursday afternoon Horn rides in, stays through Saturday. That's 4 days, Clara said. 3 if Cole's 24-hour notice means anything. Cole's notice means they want us to panic, Clara said. If we respond to the expedited hearing before Horn arrives, we're in front of a substitute magistrate who has no jurisdiction over fraud. We need to refuse the expedited hearing, and request that the case be held before the circuit judge. "Can we do that?" Greer's son asked. "We can file a motion to delay on the grounds that the case involves potential criminal fraud and requires a judge with full criminal jurisdiction," Clara said. "It's not a guaranteed hold, but it's legitimate, and it forces them to either wait for Horn or expose themselves by pushing harder." Greer put his hat back on. "Tell me what to write, and I'll sign it." "Tell all of us," said Margaret Alderman, coming around the corner with Thomas Jr. at her side, and behind her 2 more of the Creek ranchers. And Clara understood that Greer had done more than send his son to the court office last night. He had sent word to the others as well. They gathered in the back room of the dry goods, which the owner, a quiet man named Price, who had said almost nothing during any of this, but had been watching it all with sharp, careful eyes, cleared without being asked. 6 ranchers and Clara and Luke and Price himself, who turned out to have read law for 2 years before a family circumstance brought him to Sunset Ridge, and who produced from a shelf behind his counter a dog-eared copy of the Texas Property Code. It took 2 hours. Clara wrote the motion. Price checked it. Thomas Jr. copied it out 6 times in the clearest handwriting among them, and all 6 landowners signed all 6 copies, and by noon, 1 copy was filed at the land office under Fry's unwilling hand. 1 copy was in the hands of every signing landowner. 1 was being held by Price, and 1 Clara kept herself. Fry read it twice and said nothing for a long moment. "This will need to be reviewed," he said. "Review it," Clara said. "The filing date is today. That's what matters." On the walk back to the wagon, Luke said quietly, "Cole's going to see that filing before the ink dries." "I know," Clara said. "Good." He looked at her sideways. "You want him to see it," he said. "I want him to take it to whoever he reports to," she said. "Because that person is going to make a decision about whether to push forward or pull back, and either decision tells us something we need to know." They found out the next morning. It was not Cole who came. It was a lawyer, a man named Garfield, clean-suited and city-mannered, who arrived on the early train from San Antonio and went directly to the land office, and then finding nothing useful there, rode out to the Callahan Ranch in a hired buggy and knocked on the door with the particular practiced knock of a man who charges by the hour and knows it. Clara answered the door. Garfield looked at her with the mild, surprised reassessment that men of his type gave to women who answered doors in contexts they hadn't expected. Then he composed himself and said, "I represent Continental Land and Rail Associates. I'd like to speak with Mr. Callahan." "I handle Mr. Callahan's accounts and legal correspondence," Clara said. "You can speak with me." A pause. "I see," Garfield said. "Well, my client is prepared to offer a settlement. Given the complications that have arisen, they're willing to withdraw the competing claims on all 6 parcels in exchange for a right of access easement along the creek bed. A paper arrangement, only no physical disruption to any of the properties." Clara looked at him. "A right of access easement," she said. "Correct. Who would the easement benefit?" Garfield adjusted his collar. "My client. Continental Land and Rail Associates," she said. "The company with no verifiable Missouri charter, no engineering surveys, and no railroad anywhere in its actual plans." She tilted her head. "What does Continental actually want the creek access for, Mr. Garfield?" He said nothing. "Water," she said. "For a development project, something that requires a guaranteed water source, a town maybe, or an industrial operation, or a land resale venture that needs water rights to have value." She kept her voice even. "Who is the principal behind Continental? Because it isn't Briggs. Briggs is a middleman. Someone funded this, planned it, and positioned Cole inside the county office to manage the paperwork. I'd like that name." Garfield picked up his hat. "My offer is valid until Thursday morning," he said. "After that, my client will proceed with the hearings." "Thursday morning," Clara said. "Judge Elias Horn arrives in Sunset Ridge. If your client proceeds with the hearings, they'll be proceeding in front of a circuit judge who has full criminal jurisdiction." She opened the door wider. "I'd take that back to your client, Mr. Garfield. All of it." He left. Luke appeared from the kitchen doorway. He had heard every word. He's going to tell them we know more than we do, he said. Maybe, Clara said. Or he's going to tell them we know exactly as much as we do, which is enough. She turned back to the table. Either way, we have until Thursday. Came with the weight of a held breath. Horn arrived on the 2 o'clock stage, a compact, gray-haired man with the eyes of someone who has been lied to professionally for 30 years and has developed a finely calibrated sense of when it's happening again. He had read the motion to delay before he dismounted. Greer's son had ridden the copy out to meet the stage 20 miles south of town, and when Clara and Luke and the 6 ranchers were shown into the room he'd commandeered at the back of the courthouse, he was already sitting with the papers spread in front of him and his reading glasses on. "Miss Harper," he said without preamble, "you drafted this motion." "Yes, sir." "You're not a lawyer." "No, sir. I handle accounts." He looked at the papers. "Sit down, all of you." Garfield was there, and Cole, and a man none of them had seen before. Older, well-dressed, with the settled confidence of someone accustomed to having rooms arrange themselves around his comfort. He did not introduce himself. He didn't need to. The way Garfield kept glancing at him was introduction enough. Horn set the motion down. "I'm going to tell you how this is going to go," he said, addressing the room without favoring either side with his attention. "I've read the competing claims. I've read the counter-filing. I've read 3 pages of financial records that document 11 payments made by Mr. Callahan to a Mr. Harlan Briggs without contract or legal instrument, and a separate ledger showing identical arrangements with 2 other landowners present in this room." He paused. "I'm also looking at 6 identical claims filed on the same day against 6 adjacent properties, all of which share a single water source, all of which were filed by the same entity, all of which relied on the same alleged survey discrepancy, which I will note does not appear in the State Land Commissioner's records." Clara felt the breath move through her. The Austin documents had arrived by telegraph relay the previous evening. Not the full certified copies which were coming by rider, but a confirmed summary from the Commissioner's office. The original surveys for all 6 parcels were on record intact and showed no boundary discrepancies. She had filed that confirmation with Horn's clerk at 6 in the morning. Garfield stood up. "Your Honor, my client has made a good-faith settlement offer. Your client," Horn said, looking at him over his glasses, "has filed fraudulent competing claims based on misrepresented survey data employed a county official." He looked at Cole, who went the color of old chalk, "to control access to the original documentation, and has now sent legal counsel to offer an easement settlement that would effectively accomplish by contract what the fraud was meant to accomplish by force." He set his glasses on the table. "That is not a good-faith settlement offer. That is an attempt to salvage a scheme after it's been exposed." The well-dressed man stood up. "Your Honor," he said, and his voice was the voice of someone who has bought his way out of rooms before and is preparing to do it again. "I believe there has been some misunderstanding about the nature of—" "Your name, sir," Horn said. A pause. "Clifton Marsh," the man said. "I represent the investor group behind Continental." "You represent the investor group," Horn said. "So you're not Continental's lawyer, you're Continental." Marsh's jaw tightened. "I'm issuing an injunction," Horn said, picking up his pen. "All 6 competing claims are suspended pending full criminal investigation into the conduct of Continental Land and Rail Associates and associated individuals." He looked at Cole. "Mr. Cole, you are suspended from your position pending that investigation. You will surrender all documents in your custody related to these 6 parcels before you leave this building." He looked at Garfield. "Counsel, you will advise your client that obstruction of this investigation will result in immediate criminal referral." He signed the injunction with the brisk efficiency of a man who has been waiting to do exactly this. Clara sat very still. Beside her, she felt Luke exhale a long, slow, controlled release of 6 days of tension, and it moved through the room like a wave, because every rancher in that room exhaled with him. Margaret Alderman, with her eyes closed and her hands folded tight. Thomas Jr. gripping the edge of the table. Walter Greer looking straight ahead, with his jaw set and his eyes bright in a way she had not expected from him. Marsh left without speaking again. Garfield followed. Cole left last, moving the way a man moves when he has understood that the room he is in has already decided something about him that he cannot change. Horn looked at Clara. "Your documentation was clean," he said. "Chronological, cross-referenced, clearly presented. That is not an accident." "No, sir," she said. "You're not from here?" "No, sir. Pennsylvania." "Staying." She looked at Luke without quite meaning to, and he was looking back at her with that open, undefended expression that had been building since the first morning, since the ledger and the porch, and the coffee in the dark, since the fence, and the cattle and the night. Cole rode up with his threats, since every hour of work and every moment of sitting side by side at the edge of something that had started as obligation and had become something else entirely. "I think so," she said. Horn nodded once, as if that was the sensible answer, and dismissed them. Outside, the 6 ranchers shook hands and said things that people say when a weight lifts, and Margaret Alderman hugged Clara with a fierceness that surprised both of them. And Greer said something low to Luke that Clara didn't hear, but that made Luke stand a little straighter. Then the others left one by one, and it was just the 2 of them on the courthouse steps in the late afternoon, and the town of Sunset Ridge moved around them with its ordinary sounds, and the sky was wide and blue and going gold at the western edge. "You said I think so," Luke said. "I did." "That's not a yes." "No," she agreed. "It's not." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The east-facing room has a window that needs a proper latch, the kind that doesn't rattle when the wind comes through." He looked at the street. "I've been meaning to fix it for a year. Never got around to it. 2 people get around to things faster than one." Clara looked at him. "That's a very practical argument," she said. "I'm a practical man." "Luke." He turned and looked at her fully, the way he had been not quite doing for a week, holding something back, managing the distance. "I'm not her," Clara said. "One more time. Quiet. Not defensive." "I know who you are," he said. "You're the woman who got here on a Tuesday with 1 bag and a letter to deliver, and in 6 days you fixed my accounts, bluffed a bureaucrat face down a land fraud operation, organized 6 ranchers, and wrote a legal motion that held up in front of a circuit judge." He paused. "I'm not confused about who you are." The wind moved between them warm and dry, carrying the smell of the land, that particular Texas smell of dust and distance, and something almost like green at the edges. "The garden," Clara said. "The beds along the south fence. You put them in for her." "Yes." "I'd like to plant something in them," she said, "if that's all right." He looked at her for a long moment. "Whatever you want to grow," he said. She had come to Sunset Ridge to deliver a letter, to speak 6 words to a stranger, to keep a promise to the dead, and then go back to her life. She had come with 1 bag and a return ticket, and the absolute certainty that grief was the only thing she had left to offer anyone. She had been wrong about that. Evelyn, who had always been better at knowing things than Clara had given her credit for, had known she was wrong about that before she ever stepped on the train. Luke Callahan held out his hand. Clara Harper took it. And the thing that had started as a letter, a dead woman's love, forwarded by a living one, traveling 1,000 miles through guilt and grief, and the particular stubbornness of 2 people who had both been alone too long, became exactly what it had always been, trying to become a beginning. Some promises, kept faithfully enough, have a way of growing into something the person who made them never imagined. Evelyn Harper had asked her sister to deliver the truth. What she had actually delivered in the end was a life, and it turned out that was the truest thing she could have sent.